trying to be as brief as possible. My 30-year-old husband has struggled with his mental health most of the time I've known him, which is approximately 9 years. It was never a huge issue until after we had a baby 3 years ago. Since then, the stress of having a baby toddler has made his mental state worse and worse. He's become extremely emotionally hurtful and seems to have something similar to dissociative episodes when he gets extremely stressed. He will basically just go flat, saying he doesn't care about anyone or anything, and he's just mean. Then when it ends, he will apologize and say he doesn't know what to do about whatever is going on in his brain. About 2 months ago, after an argument and a night where our toddler was being particularly tantrumy, he took a small handful of Benadryl after I left the room to put the toddler to bed. I didn't know about this until he told me several days later. He didn't take enough of it to actually hurt himself, just make himself very uncomfortable with side effects. He said he regretted doing it and wouldn't do it again. Since then, he has been trying to get mental help off and on, more on than off. Friday night, I got home from the store close to 9, and he apparently had been trying to put our toddler to sleep for an hour because that was driving him nuts. His bedtime isn't even until 9, and he never wants to go to sleep without mama. So I went into the room after hearing the crying, and he basically flips out, grabs his keys, and heads to the door. He looked like he was going crazy, and I tried to pull him back but was unsuccessful. I told him if he left like this, I would call the police, and he ignored me and drove off. I found out later via dashcam footage that he was going about 60 and a 30 until he got to a parking lot and was trying to calm down. By then, I had already called 911 out of fear he was going to hurt himself again, and using the Life 360 app, was able to give them his location. 911 ended up sending police to him, who eventually ended up taking him to our nearby psych hospital for evaluation. The hospital decided he was not fit to leave, and he was put on a legal hold. Now he hates me, saying I didn't give him time to calm down. At the time, I didn't even know he had been trying to get the toddler to sleep, or that he'd been going crazy because the toddler wouldn't stop whining and crying, that I just wanted to hurt him, and that him being miserable in the psych hospital is my fault. And because of the state of his mental health and constant delay in sleeping treatment, our relationship has been very rocky for a while. I've always stuck by him, though, no matter how poorly he treated me, because I love him and know that this isn't the real him. He doesn't want anything to do with me and has said once he's out, Monday at the earliest, he's done and wants a divorce. He refuses to see my side, someone who previously attempted unalived running out in a psychotic state and driving recklessly because he wasn't going to do anything. I don't know what to do. I feel like I made the wrong decision by calling 911. After talking to him, I do believe he wouldn't have done anything to himself that night. But at the time, he wouldn't say a word to me, pushed me when I tried to keep him from leaving, and ignored my texts and calls after he left. Then again, I knew he may hate me for it, but I genuinely thought he was going to hurt himself and just didn't want him to die. People keep telling me that he's not in his right mind and that he's angry with me and will come to his senses. But I don't think I believe that. Right now, he's definitely pissed at me. How do I fix this? Is it even my fault? I'm so sad and scared of him filing for divorce because I love him without much, and I don't know where to go from here. I'm probably forgetting details somewhere. It's been a very long day/night. Please feel free to ask any questions. Thank you. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. 20 years ago, I divorced a man like that. I shared custody for a while until he became hurtful towards my son. My son is now 26 years old and has nothing to do with his emotionally crippled father, because the father would never get any help. I don't regret divorcing him. I don't regret leaving him. And my son thanks me all the time for not making him live with him or eventually even visit him. Do you want to raise your child with him believing that that's how it should be in a relationship? If you stay with this man, it will affect your child negatively for the rest of his life in ways you can't imagine. It will scar him more than a divorce will. Let him have his divorce and go live in peace. Comment 2. You did the right thing. Professionals agreed. And instead of recognizing that, he's going to use this as a new excuse to abuse you. No one chooses mental illness, but he absolutely chooses to be hurtful, and it is time to stop assuming your child won't be impacted by this. You need to put yourself first. You need to put your child first. You cannot stay with an aggressor just because they also have mental health issues. Now for the update. Thanks for sticking around for more on what's been happening. So much has unfolded since my last post. The day after my husband was admitted to the psych hospital, I got a call from his sister. She was fuming, blaming me for his breakdown. She said I should have handled it differently, that I knew how fragile he was. I tried to explain my side, but she hung up on me. It felt like a punch in the gut, having someone else in the family turn against me. Meanwhile, our toddler kept asking for daddy, not understanding why he wasn't around. It broke my heart. I had to lie, saying daddy was on a trip and would be back soon. The shame of lying to my child weighed on me, but what else could I do? On Sunday, I visited my husband. He wouldn't even look at me. He just stared out the window while I talked, trying to bridge the gap between us. I brought up memories from when we first met, how we'd laugh for hours over silly things. I hoped it would remind him of the good times, but he remained silent. It was like talking to a stranger. The next day, his doctor called. They said he was stable enough to be released, but recommended intensive outpatient therapy. They asked if I could ensure he'd attend his sessions. I agreed, despite the knot in my stomach. I knew convincing him would be another battle. When he came home, it was tense. He packed a bag and said he was going to stay with a friend. I pleaded with him to stay to try therapy, but he was adamant. He said he needed space to think, away from me and everything that reminded him of the past few days. That night, alone in our bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, wondering if I could have prevented this. The house was too quiet, the silence a constant reminder of the chaos that had erupted in our lives. The following day, I received a call from his therapist. My husband had shown up for his session, a small victory. But then, the therapist revealed something that shook me. My husband had confessed to having feelings for someone else. He said it started as a distraction from his mental struggles, but had grown into something more. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Jealousy, anger, and betrayal swirled inside me. I confronted him over the phone. He admitted it was true, but insisted it was over. That he ended it when he realized the damage it was causing. He said he wanted to focus on getting better, for himself and for our family. I was torn between relief that he wanted to work on things and the sting of his betrayal. The next few days were a blur. I juggled work, caring for our toddler, and the emotional turmoil of my marriage falling apart. My husband attended his therapy sessions, but we barely spoke. It was like living with a ghost. Then, on Thursday, something unexpected happened. My husband came home early from therapy and sat me down. He said he'd had an epiphany. He realized how much he'd hurt me, how his actions had almost torn our family apart. He wanted to make amends, to rebuild our trust. He suggested couples therapy, something he'd always been against. It was a complete turnaround from the man who had wanted a divorce just days before. I was skeptical but hopeful. We agreed to start therapy together. It was a hard choice, trusting him again. But I couldn't give up on us without trying everything. Today, we had our first session. It was raw and emotional, but it felt like a step forward. We have a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I feel like there's a glimmer of hope. Thanks for reading. Aita for dumping my boyfriend after discovering he faked his divorce and manipulated both me and his ex. I, 24-year-old female, was using a rideshare app to go back from my work. I met a guy, 34-year-old male, in one of those rides. And we got along very well, and after 2 rides, he invited me to a pastry shop to try his traditional cuisine. I had previously lived in his country, and I knew a lot about the culture, food, and it sounded great. After this first date, we kept hanging out and organizing more dates. He was always the one organizing those dates. One thing that felt off in the beginning was that he was not available during weekends. But I justified it in my mind with the fact that he lives with his parents, and I already knew his parents had health issues previously, so I did not really want to make him uncomfortable, yes. Now I understand how wrong I was. After we got physical, I told him that it would be my first intimacy experience, even though I've been in relationships before. I had never done it, and he was okay with it, and after some time, we did it, and it felt so great. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was falling in love with someone. But 2 months into our hangout, he suddenly canceled our trip plan, saying he is not in the mood after a bad traffic, and he had some problems he did not tell me about before. The next day, he texted me saying that he has 2 children and lives partially with an ex, which he wishes not to but can't leave because of the kids. I can say it's nonsense. I was devastated for the days, not only because he had kids and how manipulative he was, but also because of the way he confessed it, over text, which was very selfish. In the days after, he said he wanted to meet me to apologize in person, and when I suggested meeting on Saturday, he didn't reply and only texted again on Monday. We finally met and he told me about his situation, and to be honest, I felt so disgusted with myself. He kept saying how he is not happy with his ex because she was always complaining, not traveling, always unsatisfied, etc. And he kept saying how he felt love for me and how I was funny and all that. He said those things thinking it would make me feel good. But deep inside, I was shocked at how I fell for a man like him. He said he wished he had met someone like me years ago, and I don't understand it now because of my age. I did not trust any of his words anymore. Also, his ex did not know at all about me. Neither did his friends or family. I just felt like a side piece all along. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Sorry to tell you, but that is not his ex. To everyone judging OP or saying she is naive, as someone who was in this position before, it is very easy to believe and trust someone in this situation. She did nothing wrong and certainly is not stupid. I am guessing the guy took advantage of her inexperience. Sorry, OP. Comment 2. You were or are the side piece. You do not have enough life experience to see things for what they are yet. Break up with him and move on. That will be easier in the long run, or be dragged along for 4 more years while he never leaves or moves out. Good luck. Now, for the update. Thanks for sticking around for the update. So, the guy, let's call him Mr. X, had the nerve to show up at my work with flowers. Flowers! As if that would fix everything. He stood there, all apologetic, saying he left his ex for good this time, for me. But I wasn't buying it. I told him to leave, but he wouldn't budge until I heard him out. He claimed he had proof, showed me divorce papers. They looked real enough, but something didn't sit right with me. Turns out my gut was spot on. A friend of mine, who's a paralegal, took a look at those papers. Fake. Not just fake, but laughably so. Mr. X had gone to some pretty low lengths to keep me on the hook. I was fuming, but I kept it together. I had to be smart about this. I confronted him over coffee in public, so he couldn't make a scene. I slapped those fake papers down and watched him squirm. He tried to spin some story about how he was going to file them for real, but I cut him off. I told him we were done, and I meant it. He looked like he'd been slapped. Maybe he finally got it. Maybe not. Either way, I walked out of there feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But that's not even the half of it. The next day, his ex, let's call her Miss Y, showed up at my door. I was ready to slam it in her face, but she was in tears, holding a little girl's hand. His daughter. She'd found out about me, not from him, but from snooping on his phone. She wasn't there to fight, though. She was there to apologize. For what, I didn't know. Miss Y told me she'd been trying to leave Mr. X for years, but he'd always manipulated her into staying. She had no idea he was seeing someone else, let alone that he'd brought his daughter around me. That hit me hard. I never wanted to be part of something that hurt a kid. Miss Y and I talked for hours. She wasn't the monster Mr. X had painted her to be. She was just another one of his victims. I did something I never thought I'd do. I helped her. We found a lawyer, a real one this time, and I gave a statement about everything Mr. X had lied about. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the right thing to do. And when the court date came, Miss Y got full custody and Mr. X got a reality check. After all that, I thought I'd be done with surprises, but life had one more curveball for me. My rideshare driver one evening, a sweet old man who reminded me of my grandpa, gave me some advice. He said, "You can't control what others do, just how you respond." Simple, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been so caught up in Mr. X's drama, I'd lost sight of myself. So I started focusing on me. I picked up extra shifts, started a savings fund, and even joined a local book club. And wouldn't you know it, I met someone. Not a romantic someone, just a friend, but someone who makes me laugh and doesn't come with a truckload of lies. I guess you could say I proved I was in the right, not by getting back at Mr. X, but by moving on and building a better life for myself. One where I'm not just some guy's secret. I'm my own person, and that's enough for me. Thanks for reading. Aita for wanting a divorce. After years of feeling unloved and discovering my husband's hidden debts, my husband, 28-year-old male, and I, 31-year-old female, have been together for 10 years and we have 3 kids together. 7-year-old female, 5-year-old male, 1-year-old male. After my 3rd child was born, I developed bad postpartum depression and it affected my marriage. I began to notice that my husband makes no effort. I am a stay-at-home mom, SAHM, and he works long hours, but that's all he does most days. I do all the housework, the bills, the budgeting, the grocery shopping, the meals, the childcare, the appointments, the sports, all on my own, while juggling my own school load and mental health problems. And he doesn't try to make me feel valued for all that work. He doesn't even acknowledge it. I never hear a thank you. He just sees his own long days. My husband has never had to do anything alone with all 3 kids, and he gets mad if I complain about it. My oldest 2 children have ADHD, so they are not the easiest kids. He won't even take a half day to help me with doctor's appointments or sick kids. I just take all 3 everywhere I have to go. He doesn't ask how my day was or what I did all day. He barely asks the kids about their day. I have been trying to communicate my unhappiness to him for a while now, but nothing happens. I tell him I'm lonely. He says make some friends. I tell him I don't feel loved, valued, or appreciated, and he gets defensive, angry, and stonewalls me. I asked for weeks before my birthday for him to plan something for us. My birthday rolls around and he didn't even wish me a happy birthday until I mentioned it to him. No gift, no plans. On our anniversary, no plans again. On Mother's Day, he got me a piece of jewelry, ignoring the gift suggestions that I had given. And again, he didn't wish me a happy Mother's Day. I spent hours crying and he didn't even check on me. He said he knew I was crying but wanted to give me space. I'm just over it. I feel like my husband and I are only ever okay if I'm happy and okay. He isn't there for me emotionally. He shuts down and refuses to discuss things. I told him I perceive love through words of affirmation, and he won't do it. He just makes no effort with me. And no matter how much I ask for it, nothing changes. Anyway, after 10 years, I think I've given enough. And the blinding love I had for my husband is gone. I quit my job to raise our kids. I moved to a city where I have no friends or family because it's what he wanted. And I am miserable. I started therapy 3 weeks ago because I just can't take how miserable I am anymore. And I think it really boils down to my relationship, so I think I want to ask for a divorce. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think I'm ready. Just wanted to vent here and maybe get some advice on how to approach him, or some encouragement from people who have been in this situation. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. You don't approach him. You get a lawyer and you do not give him any heads up that you're doing this because, frankly, you don't know what he'll do with the finances if he knows you intend to leave. You take the advice of that lawyer and you plan your exit. I would also get some kind of job if you can manage that with your current situation. You need an income, you need savings. You reach out to friends and family for support, if you can trust them to do that. And understand that it's quite possible that once you've served him divorce papers, he magically starts putting in the effort you've always asked for. Do not believe it for a minute. It's an act. This man's life is going to fall apart without you to manage it, and he knows that. Comment 2. What are your plans for work? I would find a full-time job and start that before you jump into the world with 3 kids and no income. Tell him you want to work for your own happiness. I can imagine a scenario where you serve him papers, and he immediately starts redirecting his paychecks into an account you aren't listed as an owner of. And yes, you're legally entitled to the money he earns, but you might not get any of it until the divorce is settled, which could be over a year from now. Now for the update. Thanks for sticking around after my last post. So here's what went down. The day after I poured my heart out here, my husband came home with a surprise a weekend getaway for the family. I was stunned, but not in a good way. It felt like a slap in the face. He hadn't listened to a word I said about needing help at home, not a vacation. But I played along, thinking maybe this was his way of trying. We went on that trip and it was a disaster. The kids were restless, I was on edge, and he was oblivious, just snapping photos as if to prove we were the perfect family. I couldn't take it. I broke down in the hotel room, and that's when he finally asked what was wrong. I told him everything again. How I felt like a single parent, how I was drowning in responsibilities, how I felt unloved. He just stared at me, and then he said something I'll never forget. I provide for this family. Isn't that enough? That was the moment I knew. My loyalty to my kids was clear, but to him, it was hanging by a thread. We came back home and I thought things might change after our heart-to-heart. They didn't. He went back to work, long hours, no help, no change. I was at my breaking point. Then, one evening, he came home early. I was surprised, but not in a good mood. He sat me down and said he'd been thinking about what I said. He wanted to try counseling. I agreed, but I was skeptical. Counseling was rough. We dug up a lot of buried issues. I learned about his fear of not being a good provider, and he learned about my need for support beyond financial. It was pretty hard on us, of emotions, but it felt like we were getting somewhere. Then, the news dropped. I found out he'd been hiding debt from me. Credit card bills, unpaid loans, the works. He'd been working extra to pay it off. Not because he had to work long hours. I was furious. All this time, I thought we were struggling because of the economy or bad luck. But it was because he couldn't manage money. And he didn't trust me enough to tell me. I didn't know what to do. I felt betrayed. I thought about the kids, about the life we built. But I also thought about respect, trust, and partnership. All the things our marriage was lacking. I made a decision. I confronted him about the debt. I told him I knew. He was ashamed, tried to explain, but I was done listening to excuses. I told him I wanted a separation. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out if this marriage was salvageable. He moved out the next day. It was quiet at home, the kids were confused, and I was a mix of relieved and terrified. But I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I could think. I could plan. I could imagine a life where I wasn't just surviving, but thriving. The kids adjusted slowly. They missed their dad, but they also enjoyed the calm. I started to see friends, to build a support network. I was finding myself again, beyond just being a mom and a wife. Then he asked to talk. He'd been going to therapy on his own, dealing with his issues. He wanted to show me he could change. He had a plan to pay off the debt, to be more present, to be the partner I needed. He was trying, really trying. I was torn. Part of me wanted to jump back into his arms, to go back to the life we had. But a bigger part of me was cautious. I'd been burned before, and I wasn't sure if I could trust him again. I told him I needed time. I wasn't ready to make a decision yet. He understood, or at least he said he did. We left it at that. So that's where I am now, in limbo, but it's a limbo of my choosing. I'm not rushing into anything. I'm taking it one day at a time, for me and for my kids. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in the right. Thanks for reading. And if you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.